Hi and good morning and welcome to another edition of Wake Up Well. We are at the end of our sort of week of looking at prayer, contemplation and meditation. So I just wanted to share some scriptures with you this morning and then share some final thoughts on those scriptures around prayer and meditation. And our reading today comes from the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 18. And it's right in the middle of a series of parables that Jesus is saying. So it's chapter 18, verses 9 to 14. It says this: He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Two men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thusly with himself: God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. So just some thoughts and some encouragements on today's scripture. One thing on thinking about this parable that Jesus says, it's interesting to me that the Pharisee is not actually condemned by Jesus. In fact, many of the things that he describes that he does are good. However, his prayer is less acceptable to God, and this is what Jesus wants to teach us here, because he trusts in his own righteousness, whereas the tax collector throws himself upon the mercies of God, wholly on God's mercy. One is centered on God, and the other is centered on himself. The Pharisee derives his satisfaction from the fact that he does not commit the sins that other people do. But what matters is not avoiding this and doing that, but rather handing oneself over to God's mercy. That's what Jesus is implying here and highlighting to us as his followers. What incredibly different ways of approaching God. The Pharisee truly believed that he was above everybody else, especially the sinners, the poor and the lowly. The tax collector, however, was deeply repentant for the many things that he had done, and he yearned and put himself upon God's mercy. The Pharisee considered himself incredibly entitled and to be almost like he felt like he should be rewarded for his goodness. And while the tax collector hoped and prayed that God, who was merciful, would forgive him. An interesting dichotomy there. So let me ask you this morning, how do you approach God? Well, how do we approach God? How should we approach God? Do we approach God in the manner of the Pharisee, perhaps actually believing that we have earned a reward from God? Or are we more like the tax collector, coming to God with a humble and contrite heart and hoping that God will be merciful to us and forgive us? I would probably say, and this is definitely the fact for me, most likely we have both characters or both capabilities within ourselves in this matter. At times we may be more like the tax collector, almost demanding, or almost like the Pharisee, almost demanding something from God because we feel like we deserve it. And at other times we are like the tax collector, we come humbly, we become with a contrite heart and are repentant for what we have done. Yet we come trusting in God's mercy and goodness. Let me just exhort you and encourage you this week as we look at prayer and as we consider these things. The attitude of our heart really matters to God when we come before him in prayer. When we come for communion with him, let us always approach God in prayer with humbleness, with a contrite heart, that we throw ourselves upon his mercy as the tax collector did, not like the Pharisee who puffed himself up and said, I am not like those other men. Let us come before him and say, Jesus, this is how I feel, this is who I am today. I put myself on your mercy because I know that you are good. And I think that builds and develops character, rich Christian character. And that's the attitude of the heart that Jesus wants to instill in us as his followers. Bless you guys. Bye-bye.